There is a stream of life that runs through our veins and meanders into the dance of the universe. There is a softness to being, a lightness we can taste, a presence we can feel. There are movements of explosive creativity and ecstatic union, moments of transformation that stick with us for decades, even a lifetime. Intuitive realizations of life meaning. There are times set aside from beyond even time and our beloved rational mind when we are grasped by the ground of being. A great decentering of the self and a pouring into the capital S self. The binding of everything together in one. People have been inhaling this spirit since time began. St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, the whirling dervish of the Sufi, the altered states pursued by ingesting psychedelic drugs, Christian charismatics and the spiritual gift of speaking in tongues. More on that in a bit. Mystics in every religion, everywhere. Those being born again of spirit. Now, I agree with Pope Francis that there can be no truly religious experience that has a deaf ear to the cry of the world. The experiences I'm speaking about are bigger than navel gazing. Mystical encounters bring us into a close proximity with everyone. John Coltrane's music comes to mind, and the shamanistic state of rapture, the tingling sensations from our toenails all the way to the hairs on our head. I visited a missionary Baptist church in Milwaukee decades ago. The loud drums and gospel-y organ pulled me in. I was the only white person. A young woman was jumping around so violently. It wasn't dancing, flailing her arms in such elation, so much so that her white Sunday best blouse started to come off, exposing her bra. Two ushers got up and calmly covered her with blankets as if this happens all the time. The preacher preached with such passion and fervor. Big beads of sweat dripped from his brow, and a young woman would come up with a white cloth to periodically dampen that sweat off. I asked the African-American humanist theologian Anthony Pinn years ago how mysticism fits in with this thing that we call religion. It's a real thing, he said, that happens all the time, but I don't know where to put it. I don't know how to categorize it. Ancient religious leaders assumed that these experiences were hidden messages from the divine. Certain people just got struck with them. Therefore, it was only natural that I associated these experiences with my calling to ministry. In college, I went to a former Catholic priest for spiritual direction. He explained to me the interior path like this. Little by little, we are lured into illumination. We get tastes of ecstasy. And we beg and beg for more. And then we get hit with a 7.7 magnitude earthquake, and we'll feel aftershocks for days. And then we want the feeling all the time. And it becomes like a drug. And we become self-absorbed, and God weans us off these earthquake experiences with the dark night of the soul, where the feeling leaves us for long durations of time. But for people of faith who will become less attached, clear their minds, they might regularly put themselves in the presence of God. They can lead into an habitual union, a contemplative life, seeing divinity regularly in the everyday. He told me he had arrived. This didn't mean his life was perfect and that he didn't have stresses and strains. But I have never met a happier and more joy-filled person than Dr. John Perry, my first spiritual director. He had no fear of death. He told me all these mystical encounters that he had were foretastes of eternal life. Mystics are those who have direct experiences of mystery, wonder, and awe, and regularly seek them out through spiritual practices. Interpreted often in the context of religion, they are often thought to be caused by God or a pure encounter of the holy. The veil is lifted, and we see momentarily reality as it truly is, infinite, pulsing with beauty. Mystics see beyond the rules and forms of religion and seek the direct experience. This emphasis on experience and intuition is part of our Unitarian tradition. I'm thinking here of the Transcendentalists and the oneness with nature. I'm thinking here of Ralph Waldo Emerson's transparent eyeball experience, where he is nothing but sees all. The currents of universal being circulate through him, and he becomes part and particle of God. And this living tradition of ours stretches to the present with people like the Unitarian Universalist professor of ethics, Dr. Sharon Welch, who is a social activist, a non-theist, and a mystic. I was working as a clerk at a bakery that was in between the apartment I was living in and the university I was attending. A nun came in to buy some bread. We struck up a conversation, and she could tell that I was very serious and curious about faith and spirituality. She said, "Wait a minute, I got something for you." She went out into her car and gave me a book that she had written. The title of the book was called Wow, God. It turns out she was a charismatic sister. The book taught one how to elicit spiritual gifts, especially speaking in tongues. So step by step, I went through the exercises. I prayed for the gift of tongues. Cleanse me of all else but you, O God. Give me the gift of your spirit that I may know you more. May your spirit visit me. And a God hunger overtook my life. But it didn't come. The gift didn't materialize. What was I doing wrong, I wondered. Maybe I didn't have this special gift. A few months later, at a college-age ministry retreat, some family with money donated the use of their lake home up north in Wisconsin. This was no camp. This was a mansion. And I camped in some brush in a pup tent near their house. We stayed up late that first night, singing songs on guitar, singing songs of praise. And we all felt really good and close and bonded together in grace and in spirit. And I woke the next morning early before everyone else to pray. And in my tent near the pines and the dewy grass, something emerged from my mouth, a grunt, a sound that felt glorious. Parashante. Parashante. My first and only word of speaking in tongues. And I repeated it over and over. Now, I know what you're thinking. This was gibberish. And you may wonder how it would edify anyone's faith, but I was ecstatic. I had a special prayer language that transcended words, a direct connection with the divine. I felt very, very, very special. I've told very few people about this. In fact, I can teach you all now how to speak in tongues in a much faster and less time-consuming way. I want you to repeat this phrase. She bought a Honda. She bought a Honda. Now I want you to say it really fast 3 times. She bought a Honda, she bought a Honda, she bought a Honda. There you go. Now, I have no doubt that some pastors and clergy practice these phrases over and over again in front of a mirror, and it's sort of a show. But they're going after something, an unexplainable encounter, a mystical experience, the root of all religion. In the book, The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, who is sort of known as the father of American psychology, he tried to study these mystical experiences, and he came up with these characteristics. It's transient. The experience is temporary. The individual soon returns to a normal frame of mind, but it feels outside the normal perceptions of space and time. Ineffable. The experience cannot be adequately put into words, so we often use images and metaphors. Noetic. The individual feels that he or she has learned something valuable from the experience and feels to have gained knowledge that is normally hidden. Passive. The experience happens to the individual largely without conscious control. It's not like something, like an actor can kind of cry on cue. It's not something like that. It sort of just happens. The Oxford Handbook of Psychology and Spirituality refers to these experiences as RSMEs, religious, spiritual, mystical experiences. Now, it makes sense that I would attribute my RSME to religion and God because that's what I grew up with, and many traditions speak of this experience. On a 15-minute break from work years ago, while looking out on Lake Michigan and listening to the music of John Coltrane, I threw out all structures and paradigms of God and experienced a lifting illumination. It was so real, so intense, I decided to drop everything I'd ever learned about theology and start over. So what is this experience? I don't know. I can attest that they are real and that it is powerful and it can change you. It's not a dream. In contrast to dreamlike states, mystical experiences feel very real. In fact, realer than everyday reality. The writer Aldous Huxley proposed that our brains are actually filters or valves that limit these mystical experiences from happening, which sort of makes sense in an evolutionary biological way because we don't maybe need them on an everyday basis, so our brains filter them out. Or maybe it's our rational educations that have trained us to disregard them. But I would say what I call a mystical experience affirms life deeply within a person in such a positive and powerful way. The idea of ever killing myself is an idea, but like it's something I could never really fathom because I just love life so much. The psychologist Abraham Maslow would call them peak experiences. Scientists have only begun seriously studying them in the past few decades. In one study, Neuroimaging and Spiritual Practice by Mario Beauregard, Carmelite nuns were asked to think about and go over their most intense and intimate mystical experiences while their brains were being examined with fMRI technology. Now, I'm not going to repeat all this language. I don't understand it myself, but one of the things I thought was interesting is the nuns described the feelings of joy and unconditional love, and they called them sacred experiences, and some of the mapping from the brain images overlapped with romantic and maternal love. The wonders of our mammalian brains. Whatever they are, they feel immediate. Whatever they are, they feel like they're mediated, that is given to us from an outside source, but they are ultimately coming from within. Dance, prayer, music, chant, meditation, sacred symbols, mantras, shamanistic rituals, singing together, reading sacred texts, good lovemaking, and being in nature are all practices that can elicit the mystical experience. The born-again experience is not just for the born-again Christians. They are for everyone on the journey of transformation, whether you believe in God or not. The Buddhist tradition says that if you want to experience divinity, feel the sunlight on your face, feel the wind on your hand. The Bhagavad Gita says that God is attained by all those who see God in every action. I've begun to think being fully aware, fully awake, and present is experiencing divinity and living the contemplative life. And that sometimes there are these unfenced elations. I also think it's important to distinguish between the mystical experience and mysticism. That is the process. Mysticism involves being in community, ritual, and practice. When I was a chaplain at a Unitarian Universalist youth con, that is a week-long youth conference, they called a certain ritual unconditional love. And they did it at every youth con. A senior in high school who had been to dozens of these called out, "Unconditional love will start shortly." And everyone knew what to do, and I just followed. I only had a dim idea of what was going on. We went out of the sanctuary, everyone lined up in the hallway, and we started chanting and slowly processed into the sanctuary that had been darkened and all the chairs removed. We were instructed to spread out, and we were told that all of us are loved unconditionally. Then half the room was instructed to go to the other half of the room and give hugs to anyone who did not have their arms crossed. Then after some time, the other half would go hug the other half. And what I saw was, teenagers embracing each other with an embodied love. Tears were flowing. Perhaps for the first time, these youth felt loved. Streams of unfenced elation. That same ecstasy that pierces through the dust of the earth and breaks into waves of leaves and flowers. So may it be. Amen.